A very good evening to you, and many thanks for joining us on The Big Story. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Tonight, a task force formed in February this year to help the country restore its depleted forest cover has implicated the Kenya Forest Service Management and the board for the depletion of forest cover in the country. The task force, headed by the Greenbelt Movement chairperson Marion Wakanyi Kamau, handed its reports to Deputy President William Ruto today, noting that KFS is marred by corruption and incompetence. Besides, the task force also found that KFS is characterized by the lack of accountability and ethical behaviors and limited capacity. The task force, in its recommendations, noted the overhaul of the board and the prosecution of KFS members as part of what it recommends as the solution. And the members also found that KFS is characterized by the lack of accountability and unethical behaviors, and has noted that a vetting process and prosecution of KFS officers found culpable is necessary. This effort to restore national forest cover is our big story tonight, and we begin with the Deputy President assurance after he received the report earlier today.
We have no shelf to put this report. We will quickly work on an implementation matrix. I have instructed the minister to develop in 10 days an implementation matrix of the task force report so that we can quickly seize the moment and ensure that we have a plan that will enable the government of Kenya take charge of the huge issue that currently is in the minds of the people of Kenya, of the management of our forest resources.
And tonight on the show, I have the chairperson of Green Africa Foundation, Dr. Isaac Kalua, who is also a member of the Forest Task Force. And I also have an environmental lawyer, Benson Ochieng. But before we hear from my panel tonight, let's cross over live to the Central Business District, from where our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, is joining me live. And Sophia, we saw the report was handed over to the CS Environment today. What does this report entail?
Good evening, Sharon. It's good to see you. So that report by the task force that was formed earlier in the year in February being released today, we got a statement as the media. We are yet to see the full statement. But as you mentioned, one of the things that the statement highlights from this task force report is a harsh indictment on the Kenya Forest Service. And Sharon, it's a sad and unfortunate situation for Kenya that the body mandated to manage forests in the country and spearhead the protection of the same is unfortunately spearheading the destruction of this same forest. It is for selfish gain, profiteering. And in fact, in this statement, the task force states that it is deep-rooted, institutionalized corruption that they have witnessed from the Kenya Forest Service, and that these individuals have benefited themselves and also others, perpetuated this, that it's a cartel of sorts, if you like. And therefore, a sad reality that Kenyans entrusting these individuals to be in charge of such an important organ for the sake of Kenya's environment has been seeing the destruction of the same. But also, this report talking about the illegal settlements being another key problem that has seen the degradation and destruction of the water catchment areas, because many of these places we've seen people come and settle there, and that means that as the population grows, they will want more space for living, and as far as everyday livelihood, whether it's fuel, cutting the timber for construction and other functions. So that is happening at a very first rate, and yet you do not have afforestation. There are no efforts to ensure that these trees that are being cut down, there are others being planted. The report also highlighting a problem that has been witnessed in what they call the commercial forest plantation. And so there is a sector in the forestry ministry that is concerned and does cater to, yes, trees can be cut for commercial purposes, but replanting happens. So this report finding that replanting in those instances has not taken place. And also, when it comes to harvesting of the trees, they are left unattended, therefore rotting. And the recommendation on that is that there be a paradigm shift on the approach of that sector. And as far as commercial forest plantation, the counties themselves are marking 5 years since the system of devolution came into place here in Kenya, also being indicted that they have not operationalized the laws that require for them to take on some of these responsibilities, and as far as conservation efforts are concerned. And so, Sharon, with that came recommendations that one, the Forest Service Board be disbanded, a new one on merit base be vetted and recruited, Sharon. Also, in the interim, there will be an independent caretaker management team that will be put together, one that will see individuals that are vastly experienced sit in this particular group to ensure that the management of forests from this point going forward is on the right track. Important to note as well, Sharon, remember earlier on we saw the Kenya Forest Service suspending some officials on allegations of graft and interdicting others. Today, an envelope was handed over to the EACC, is what we understand from the CS environment, saying that this envelope contains the name of those culpable. So not talking about who they are. In the past, we've heard about envelopes in the country. Perhaps with time, we will get to know who these individuals are. And what is interesting to note is the CS did mention that some of the individuals who had raised their opposition to the composition and some members of this task force have found themselves implicated, saying that now perhaps it is understood why they were opposed to this. But the task force, again, in handing over this report to the CS earlier on, saying that they have done their groundwork, they've toured the country, they have listened to members of the public, and they're confident that this task force report and its recommendations is a good turnaround point for Kenya to head in the right direction. Sharon.
Right, Sophia. And let's talk about a solution that would be needed, to increasing forest cover in the country. Such a solution would be multifaceted, isn't it?
It would have to be multifaceted, Sharon, because first, it would be important to look at, in the past 4 years, you remember last year, the then CS Environment Wahungu talked about an increase in the forest cover of 5.3%, that in 2013 it stood at 1.3. As of last year, it had grown to 7.6%. So what is it that happened then? Of course, Wahungu had talked about rehabilitation efforts of over 400,000 acres of land. So what kind of rehabilitation efforts happened then that can be practiced going forward to ensure this happens? But one case in point is one of those ventures that the Kenyan government, in collaboration with the European Union, have sought to undertake in the Cherangani Mount Kenya catchment areas. But that has so far been halted. Why? Because of individuals living there. They call themselves indigenous forest dwellers. So they're saying they have every right to be there. They've been there from the very beginning. And so the EU and the Kenya government coming to talk about rehabilitating these particular catchment areas would lead to their eviction. They're saying what they need is constructive conversations. What they need is compensation for this to actually bear fruit. So the EU has, in the meantime, pulled out and asked the Kenyan government to deal with this conflict. So you can see some of those challenges, even with other plans being put out to rehabilitate other land and catchment areas in the country. And this is a project that was introducing and injecting 3.6 billion shillings, Sharon. But also important to note the politics of it. We have seen politicians, on selfish ambition and looking out for their interest, for gaining mileage politically for the short term, utilize this kind of scenarios. Land is allocated, but in the end, you find that there is no long-term evaluation of the impact of that. So at the political level, important that we also see that conversation happening, because many a times, even when there are calls to evacuate the illegal squatters, you'll see some politicians coming and opposing the same, because to them it's all about political survival, and that would affect them and implicate their careers going forward. So that is a serious issue. But also, Sharon, an important one is the role of everyday mwananchi. We're talking about KFS and the government, the county governments and their roles, but the everyday Kenyan and being sensitized on the need to conserve the environment, on the need to realize they have a role to play as well. The world, Kenya is having a conversation about climate change. It is real, it is happening, Mother Nature is unforgiving. And so if as a country there are no programs and campaigns taken up to sensitize the public about the same, then we will be making one step forward and perhaps two steps back. And finally, and this perhaps will be good also to engage our guests on tonight, with this, because currently we are on a 3-month logging ban in the country that was announced, or moratorium, if you like, by the Deputy President. We're 2 months in, 1 more month to go. You had the Kenya Forest Workers Group, that is what they call themselves, opposing this ban and saying that it does not align and augur well with the principles of forest management. As to what that means, because there are those who are of that school of thought that when we've seen even like some counties coming in to ban logging, that it is not thought out as to whether it really deals with the realities and the problems that Kenyans are facing. So it will be great to hear our guests tonight, their views on that as well, Sharon.
Pia Wanuna, indeed, we shall be getting to hear the thoughts of our guests tonight, and we want to get straight into that conversation. I am joined in studio by Dr. Isaac Kalua, who is the chairperson of Green Africa Foundation and is also a member of the Forest Task Force. I'm also joined by Benson Ochieng, who is an environmental lawyer, to have this all-critical conversation tonight. And I just want to begin with you, Dr. Kalua, as a member of the task force. And you have heavily indicted the service, the Kenya Forest Service. Let's just begin first by talking about the methodology that you used as a task force. We have already seen a lot of criticism, first of all, regarding the composition of the task force. So talk to us about your methodology and how apolitical was this process. Was there any kind of political interference? Some saying that your indictment is rather harsh on the Kenya Forestry Service.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Allow me to say and to thank very sincerely the team that has been working in the task force. I thank God for giving me the opportunity. It was a job that we had to do, and we just did the job. And the methodology was very straightforward. One of the things that we did is we took the information that we had on the Gazette notice and all the terms and references that were referred to us, and we divided this into 3 task force groups, so that we had 3 subcommittees of the process. So we had one on forestry, we had another one on matters of governance, we had another one also on the commercial engagements of the forest issues that were available. So after dividing ourselves into these groups, we then entered into a very important phase, which was now information gathering. We had to look at information and all the write-ups that were available on the desk, and we also engaged individuals by summons to get to know what is happening, to get details. We went further into private or camera sessions where we had teams presenting, and for obvious reasons, there are people who would not want to be implicated or to be opened up to the public because of the sensitivity of the issues that they were presenting, and validly so. And then we also entered into an area of aerial survey and also on the ground survey visits that we did across the country in several areas, engaging all players and stakeholders, including the main people in logging and the sawmillers, the tea farmers, and various individuals, including KFS and including also the Kenya Forest Service institutions. Let me say this. First of all, to correct that the information that we did today, the report was given to the minister, not to the deputy president. The deputy president, it was a brief so that it can now be taken to the next level. He is yet to receive the information, and then thereafter, in 10 days, as promised, it will be given to the president, and right. The rest of the issues will follow thereafter. And the information is not based on any victimization. It is just factual, merely factual, to the point, so that it is not anything that is personal in this process. It's just a job that had to be done, and these are the findings right. As they are.
Right. And Mr. Ochieng, Kenya is among the countries that have less than 10% forest cover of the total land mass, 10% being the UN recommended standard. How did we get here as a country?
Well, it's interesting. I think our dealings with forest management has come a long way. There is a time that we were talking about only 2 or about 3% forest cover in this country. The last time I checked, the experts were saying that we are about 7%, 8%, including the reference that was just made to what the previous minister, Professor Wakungu, did indicate as forest cover. So between 2013 and today, I don't know what has happened that we have come up with such drastic action and such scathing indictment of the management of forests in this country. I'm yet to wrap my mind around all that is going on in the short span of time, because one may, in as much as it is always good to have drastic action when serious measures are required, the whole background and context with which and speed with which matters have taken place leaves a lot to be questioned. At first, we saw members of parliament come to the public and start crying how our rivers were drying up. Within the same week, we heard of a task force that was set up to work within 14 days. Within no time, we were told term was extended to 30 days. And within 60 days, it has given this report. There is just so much to wrap one's head around that it is good that you brought this for debate right now.
Right. Okay, and before we continue with this conversation, let me now run you through those findings and recommendations that were given by the report this morning, by the Forest Task Force report. If you can just run some of those findings there so that it will inform our debate further. Right, and as you can see there, that some of the key findings talking about the institutionalized corruption by the Kenya Forest Service and victimization of dedicated officer, illegal logging of cedar trees, destruction of forest by illegal squatters, and limited capacity of KFS law enforcement. These are some of the findings by the task force given in the report today that was given to the CS environment. Other findings including that commercial forest plantations have been poorly managed, and that no timber licenses been given for selected sawmillers, and that direct allocation in awarding logging rights is not what the task force recommends. Talking also of duplication of roles in forest resource management, and as well as highlighting the role given to county governments in the conservation of forests, saying that the counties have not given an implementation framework of existing conservation laws. Other recommendations include that a new Kenya Forest Service board to be constituted, and that independent caretaker management team to be formed, as well as a public vetting process of current KFS personnel and prosecution of KFS staff implicated in malpractices. You will remember that at the moment, 16 officers of the KFS have been suspended, and the task force is now recommending that they be investigated and any punitive measures measures that would then follow after their investigations. Other recommendations include the establishment of core conservation zones in forest, as well as the removal of illegal squatters through consultative processes, and infrastructural developments, saying that they should adhere to existing policies and that clear coordination framework among agencies should be enforced. They also recommend the involvement of community forest associations. Further recommendations include a total overhaul of commercial forest plantations management, and also recommending that they discontinue the plantation of forest stocks, as well as issuing timber licenses with terms and conditions, and engaging private landowners and state corporations, as well as county governments, to collaborate with the Forestry Ministry in enforcing conservation laws that exist. And let's continue having this conversation with my guest tonight. And Dr. Kalua, really, the task force has indicted the Kenya Forest Service very, very heavily. How much do you think, to what extent do you think an overhaul in the leadership will lead to the solutions in what we are seeing in environment degradation in the country?
I'll repeat again and again that the issues that have been brought are based on tangible information. When we talk about issues of corruption, specifically, we are pinning this to situations and transactions that you can actually trace from the forester up all the way to the top of the organization, where transactions have shown very clearly that money has exchanged hands in a tangible way through M-Pesa. Allow me to very early at this stage, just as my very able chair raised today, and also as we spoke to the Deputy President earlier, there are very good and very dedicated members of staff of Kenya Forest Service. We are not talking of the entire unit. We are not talking of everybody who is working in the forest. There are indeed very, very dedicated officers who have done their job diligently, and they deserve Kenya's pat at their back. So we are not talking about the institutions. We are speaking about individuals. When we talk about victimizations, there are officers that have been found to have been sent to different stations outwardly and not inwardly when they report and they bring out issues. We are talking of materials when officers on the grassroots have been allowed to issue licenses, and actually there are no licenses at the moment that have been issued. It's only a letter of allotment, a letter of authority for you to access funds. And this is against what is stipulated in the Act. And therefore, we are talking of very specific things, and it is not about the institution. It is some individuals who have been found to be culpable. Mm-hmm. And this is a situation that has been inculcated over a period of time. The rain has not just started beating us now. Right. The effects are what we are seeing today. And actually, if you take time to read the report, you will be able to appreciate that we have done so much. And it also picks the spirit of other previous reports that have been presented by other various task forces, and they've been lying in the shelf. The greatest thing that has happened to Kenya today is the word by His Excellency, the Deputy President, the Minister himself, saying that this report has got no room in any of the shelves in this country. And that is why there is a clear mandate and a clear process. Within 3 days, as the Minister said, he's going to appoint a team that is going to take over in the interim space, so that there is no lapse or no laguna of activity activities of this important sector that brings into our pumps 7 billion Kenya shillings into our economy. We are talking of a country where we are losing 5,000 hectares of land on an annual basis. We are talking of a forest cover that needs to be increased, and I'm so happy that my colleague talked about this. When this is something also we need to educate Kenyans about the forest cover. The montane forests, which is just the areas around the mountains with forest, in this country is only 2%, and that is where our forests are mainly are. There are other areas which have been scientifically been found to be having trees and forests that are in lower parts of the country, amounting to about 7.4%, and this is in the economic review that was recently released. And we are talking of a sector that employs 50,000 people directly and 300,000 people indirectly. We are talking of our sources of water in this nation, and therefore deserves our best to think about them. Right. So let us not just get lost in saying that KFS has been indicted so heavily. And again, even in our report, we gave a closed envelope that actually mentions the officers. There are not many. It's a few that have inculcated a culture that has really affected every Kenyan today. And it just had to come to an end, and then we move on to a different direction. So it's not personal, it's not about the organization, it is about what is right for this nation and what has been provided for in the constitution that we must do for our country.
Right, and Mr. Ocheng, I want to get your reaction to this report that was given by the task force today and the recommendations therein, but we have to take a short break now. We'll come back with that. So don't go too far. We want to take a short break here on The Big Story. When we return, we continue with the conversation.